Thank you for a contract that felt like a prison with no escape. She married the millionaire believing it would be just a formality. But the honeymoon was written in the most secret clauses. And in bed, she discovered that destiny had other plans for her. What do you think will happen in this story? Comment and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. Emily Reynolds never imagined her life would completely change that April afternoon. While organizing her students' work in the small classroom at Father Mitchell Elementary School in the West Side neighborhood of Portland, the 32-year-old teacher contemplated the results of the Dreams, That Transform project, an initiative she had created to give voice to children from the periphery. With few resources but a lot of heart, Emily had built a space where boys and girls believed it was possible to dream, even when their surroundings said otherwise. "Teacher, you're going to be famous," said Peter, one of her most enthusiastic students, showing her the article in the local newspaper that highlighted the educator's work. Emily smiled with simplicity. She didn't seek recognition. She simply believed in education's transformative potential. With a degree in education from Portland State University and a specialization in community education, she had turned down offers from private schools to dedicate herself to public education, where she believed she could make a real difference. That same afternoon, as students were leaving school, a black limousine parked in front of the worn-out gates of the school, catching everyone's attention. From the vehicle stepped an elegant elderly woman with silver hair and a dignified posture, accompanied by two discreet security guards. It was Mrs. Eleanor Grant, the matriarch of the Grant family. Controllers of Grant Enterprises, one of the country's largest business conglomerates, with interests ranging from construction to technology. "Are you Emily Reynolds?" asked Mrs. Grant with a firm but gentle voice. "Yes, I am," replied Emily, intrigued by the presence of this imposing figure in her workplace. "I read about your project. I'd like to talk. Do you have a few minutes?" That seemingly casual meeting would mark the beginning of a relationship that would change both their trajectories. Mrs. Grant, at 83, had been diagnosed with a progressive heart condition and was looking for someone who could offer more than medical care, someone who would bring life to her days. In Emily's determined gaze, the matriarch saw something she hadn't seen in a long time: authenticity. After several conversations, Mrs. Grant made a surprising proposal. She wanted Emily to become her personal companion, with a salary equivalent to 5 times what the teacher earned at school. At first, Emily hesitated. Her commitment was to public education. However, Mrs. Grant suggested a solution. Emily could continue her educational project in the afternoons, while mornings and early evenings would be spent at the Grant mansion in the Heights neighborhood. "Don't worry, my dear. I'm not buying your time. I'm investing in your talent," stated the matriarch, with an enigmatic smile that Emily would only understand much later. By accepting the proposal, Emily entered a universe she had only known through the news. The Grant mansion was a palace in neoclassical style, with exuberant gardens designed by renowned landscapers, artwork signed by American masters like Hopper and O'Keeffe, and a staff that moved with the precision of a Swiss watch. In the first days, she felt out of place. The gazes of the older employees carried the natural distrust toward an outsider. "Don't be intimidated," advised Margaret, the housekeeper who had served the family for 4 decades. "Mrs. Grant has a good eye for people. If she chose you, it's because she saw something special." As the weeks passed, the relationship between Emily and Mrs. Grant surpassed formality. They walked together through the gardens, while the matriarch shared stories of the construction of the family empire, started by her husband, William Grant, with a small construction company in rural Oregon. Mrs. Grant, however, wasn't just the businessman's wife. She had been the silent strategist behind many decisions that leveraged the group. "Men think they lead alone, but there's always a woman pointing north when they get lost," she confided once, with a gleam of sagacity in the blue eyes that age hadn't managed to erase. Gradually, Emily realized there was something beyond healthcare in their relationship. Mrs. Grant was seeking a confidant, someone who would see the person behind the name and fortune. During the nights, the matriarch requested that Emily read to her not just literature books, but also business reports and economic news, about which they had long conversations. "Money is just an instrument, Emily. What we do with it is what defines our legacy," she often said. On a particularly significant afternoon, after Emily returned from her project at the school, Mrs. Grant asked to see the young woman's educational work. Even against medical recommendation, the matriarch insisted on visiting Father Mitchell Elementary. Dressed with uncommon simplicity for her standards, she attentively observed the children presenting their dreams and projects. At the end, with teary eyes, she made a substantial donation to the project, ensuring that no child would go without materials or cultural field trips. However, what most caught Mrs. Grant's attention was the absence of her grandson, Alexander Grant, CEO of Grant Enterprises, at the inauguration of the school's new computer room, financed by the family foundation. Despite confirming his attendance, he sent his assistant with an excuse about an emergency meeting. "My grandson knows the price of everything but the value of nothing," lamented Mrs. Grant on the way back to the mansion. "He grew up surrounded by privilege but empty of affection." Alexander Grant, 38, was known in the business world as the calculator. With a degree in business administration from Harvard and an MBA from Stanford, he had taken command of Grant Enterprises after his father, who now only occupied the position of chairman of the board. Under his management, the company had doubled in value, but had also gained a reputation for restructurings that resulted in mass layoffs and for relentless negotiations with suppliers. Newspapers praised his financial results, while unions painted him as the symbol of corporate coldness. "He wasn't always like this," confided Mrs. Grant one night after a health crisis that had left her more fragile. "Alexander was a sensitive boy who loved music and drew birds, but my son and daughter-in-law molded him to be a successor, not a complete human being." Emily listened attentively while adjusting the matriarch's pillow. She knew Alexander only from his rare visits to his grandmother. Always hurried, always with a cell phone in hand, always with a distant look that seemed to calculate how much time he needed to spend on this family obligation. "He needs to learn to love, Emily," said Mrs. Grant, holding the young woman's hand with surprising strength for her physical frailty. "And you are the only person who can teach him." Confused by that declaration, Emily thought it was just the ramblings of an elderly lady. In the following months, however, Mrs. Grant frequently requested her grandson's presence when Emily was nearby, creating situations for them to interact. Alexander, always formal, treated Emily with distant politeness, clearly uncomfortable with the closeness between his grandmother and the hired teacher, as he called her. What none of them could predict was that Mrs. Grant was plotting behind the scenes, a plan that would challenge all conventions and shake the structures of the Grant Empire, a plan that would only be revealed when she was no longer among them, but whose consequences would forever change the destiny of Emily and Alexander. Autumn had already tinged the leaves of the trees in the Grant Mansion gardens when Mrs. Grant departed this world during a serene May night. The matriarch fell asleep with a smile on her lips after asking Emily to read her a poem by Emily Dickinson. By her side, besides the educator, was only Margaret, the housekeeper. Alexander arrived 2 hours later with a grave expression and still holding his phone as if his grandmother's passing were just another appointment in his packed schedule. "Were you with her?" he asked Emily, who nodded in silence, her eyes still red. For a fleeting instant, something resembling gratitude passed over the businessman's face, soon replaced by the controlled expression he always wore. Mrs. Grant's wake gathered politicians, business people and celebrities in a ceremony that seemed more like a social event than a farewell. Emily observed from the corner of the room the hypocrisy of people who barely knew the matriarch competing for space to be photographed next to the coffin. Only a small group, old mansion staff, some children from the educational project, and a few close friends, seemed to genuinely feel the absence of that extraordinary woman. 3 days after the burial, Dr. Walter Hayes, Mrs. Grant's personal lawyer for more than 40 years, called a meeting in the mansion's library for the reading of the will. Present were Alexander, his parents, Robert and Judith Grant, Alexander's cousin, Mark Grant, the group's financial director, 2 board members, and, to everyone's surprise, Emily. Miss Reynolds's presence was a specific request from Mrs. Grant, explained Dr. Hayes, adjusting his reading glasses before opening the sealed document. The beginning of the will followed as expected. Distribution of personal belongings among friends and longtime employees, donations to charitable institutions, specifications about the future of the foundation that bore her name. Margaret received a small house in rural Oregon and a lifetime pension. Other old employees were also included. When it seemed that everything would continue normally, Dr. Hayes cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses again, as if preparing to announce something delicate. Regarding the shares of Grant Enterprises under my ownership, which represent 40% of the total, read the lawyer, they will remain in a temporary administrative fund for a period of up to 6 months, after which they will be transferred in full to my grandson, Alexander William Grant, under one non-negotiable condition. A tense silence settled in the room. Alexander, who until then had maintained a relaxed posture, straightened in his chair. The condition is that Alexander William Grant marries Emily Reynolds within 30 days after the reading of this will, and maintains this marriage for, at minimum, an equal period of 6 months, during which both must reside under the same roof. The shock was instantaneous. Judith Grant let out a muffled scream. Robert choked on the whiskey he was drinking. Mark, the cousin, couldn't disguise a smile of satisfaction, and Alexander, for the first time in years, completely lost his composure. "This is absurd. There must be some mistake," he vociferated, standing up. "My grandmother wouldn't do this to me." Emily, as stunned as everyone else, remained motionless, unable to process what she had just heard. She felt the gazes, sometimes accusing, sometimes curious, resting on her. "Should the condition not be met," continued Dr. Hayes, imperturbable, "the shares will be equally divided between the Eleanor Grant Foundation and a public education fund, without any future management by the Grant family." "This is posthumous manipulation. I'll contest it legally," threatened Alexander, his face red with fury. Dr. Hayes removed his glasses with studied calm. "Of course you can, Mr. Grant, but I should inform you that your grandmother anticipated this reaction. The will was drawn up with all legal requirements, including psychological evaluation, attesting to her full mental capacity. Additionally, she left videos explaining her decision, which will be presented to the judge should the document be contested. The legal battle could last years, during which the shares will remain blocked and effective control of the company in the hands of the board, which, as we know, has members quite aligned with your cousin Mark." The mention of Mark made Alexander glare at his cousin, who now displayed a neutral expression, although his eyes revealed calculation. The relationship between the two had never been friendly. Mark, the son of Robert's brother, had always believed he should have been chosen to lead the group, not Alexander. "I'll take my leave," announced Emily, finally finding her voice. "I didn't know anything about this and have no intention of participating in this arrangement." "Miss Reynolds," interrupted Dr. Hayes, "Mrs. Grant also anticipated your reaction. There's a letter addressed specifically to you. I'd like you to read it before making any decision." He handed Emily a sealed envelope with the Grant family crest. Inside was a handwritten letter in the elegant calligraphy of the matriarch. "Dear Emily," the letter began, "when you read these words, I will have departed. I know my request will seem crazy, perhaps even cruel, but believe me when I say it's not out of whim that I ask this of you. Alexander is drowning in an ocean of coldness he himself created. You possess what he most needs to learn, compassion. I know you don't love him now, perhaps you never will, but give him and yourself this chance. I'm not asking you to sacrifice your life, just 6 months. In exchange, I guarantee that your educational project will receive perpetual funding, regardless of your decision after this period. The choice, however, is entirely yours. With eternal love, Eleanor." Silent tears streamed down Emily's face. As she folded the letter, she looked at Alexander, who stared at her with a mixture of anger and distrust. "You planned all this, didn't you?" he accused, approaching. You manipulated my grandmother when she was vulnerable. I never asked your grandmother for anything beyond respect for my work, replied Emily, holding his gaze. And I have no interest in your money or your company. I'll refuse. I regret to inform you, intervened Dr. Hayes, that both need to accept for the clause to be valid. If you refuse, Miss Reynolds, the consequences for Grant Enterprises will be the same as if Mr. Grant refused. The atmosphere in the library became even tenser. Robert Grant, until then silent, approached his son. We need to talk privately, he said, leading Alexander out of the room. Mark followed them, as did Judith and the board members, leaving Emily alone with the lawyer. Why did she do this? Asked Emily, feeling betrayed by the woman she considered almost a second mother. Mrs. Grant was a brilliant strategist, replied the lawyer. She never made decisions without considering all variables. If she did this, she had reasons that go beyond what's written in this letter. In the days that followed, the Grant mansion became a minefield. Emily returned to her small house in the Hawthorne neighborhood, trying to process everything that had happened. On the third day after the reading of the will, she received a visit from Alexander, accompanied by 2 security guards who remained in the car. Can we talk? He asked, looking uncomfortable on the simple porch of Emily's house. She led him to the modest living room, decorated with books, plants, and some photos of her students. She offered coffee, which he declined with a gesture. For a few moments, Alexander examined the environment, as if trying to find some sign of extravagance that would confirm his suspicions about Emily's character. Let's get straight to the point, he finally said. I don't know what you said or did to convince my grandmother, but we're in a complicated situation. The board is taking advantage of this absurd condition to question my leadership. Mark is already articulating support to assume temporary control. And what does that have to do with me? I already said I won't participate in this plan. You don't understand the implications, continued Alexander. If I lose control, 5,000 jobs will be at risk. Mark won't hesitate to make drastic cuts to maximize short-term profits. His first measure will be to cancel all the company's social projects, including funding for public schools. Emily felt the weight of that information. She knew the impact of Grant Enterprises' educational programs on dozens of schools in the Ig region. I'm proposing an agreement, continued Alexander, handing her a folder. A marriage contract with clear clauses. We get married, fulfill the stipulated period, and then go our separate ways. You'll receive generous financial compensation and guarantees that the educational project you coordinate will have permanent funding. Emily opened the folder. The contract was meticulous, with clauses ranging from the division of spaces in the mansion to the obligation of public appearances as a couple. One of them specified that they should spend a week in Lake Tahoe, where the family maintained a property. Are you really willing to live this farce? Asked Emily, still incredulous. For 6 months? To ensure control of the company my family built over generations? Yes, I am. There was something in Alexander's calculated coldness that provoked in Emily a mixture of repulsion and curiosity. It was as if, behind that impeccable facade of a businessman, there was a person imprisoned exactly as Mrs. Grant had suggested. I'll think about it, she finally replied. We don't have time. I need an answer by tomorrow. After Alexander's departure, Emily spent the night awake rereading Mrs. Grant's letter and analyzing the contract. The next morning, she made a decision that would forever change the course of her life. She would accept the agreement, not for the money or financial guarantees, but because somewhere inside her, she felt she owed it to the woman who had believed in her. 2 weeks later, in a discreet ceremony at the registry office, Emily Reynolds officially became Emily Reynolds Grant. The only guest was Margaret, who served as a witness alongside Dr. Hayes. As they left the registry office, they were received by a small crowd of photographers and journalists. How did you meet? Shouted a reporter. Is it true you were an employee of the family? Questioned another. Alexander, accustomed to the spotlight, held Emily by the waist with rehearsed intimacy and smiled for the cameras. My grandmother always had the gift of seeing what others don't. She recognized in Emily the perfect woman for me, even before I realized it. As Alexander led Emily to the car, protected by security guards, he whispered between his teeth, maintaining the smile, "Remember, we're now the perfect couple, until the end of this agreement." That night, as they settled in separate wings of the Grant mansion, as stipulated in the contract, Emily contemplated Mrs. Grant's portrait in the hallway. "What did you really want with all this?" she asked in a low voice. Unknown to her, on the other side of the mansion, Alexander was asking exactly the same question while watching the crescent moon through his bedroom window. The first days of the appearance marriage unfolded in a carefully choreographed dance. Alexander and Emily maintained the facade of a loving couple in public, while in the privacy of the mansion, they barely crossed paths in the corridors. When they inevitably met during meals, they exchanged only necessary words, like actors who forget their lines as soon as the curtains close. At business dinners and corporate events, Alexander introduced Emily as "my wife," words that never ceased to sound strange on his lips. She, in turn, represented with dignity the role of the First Lady of the Grant Empire, wearing the elegant dresses that mysteriously appeared in her closet, courtesy of Judith, who, despite her initial opposition, had decided that if the farce was inevitable, it would at least be executed with class. In the third week of cohabitation, during a silent breakfast, Alexander announced without preamble, "We'll leave for Lake Tahoe tomorrow. The contract stipulates a week there, and I need to fulfill this before the board meeting next month." "I thought we were going in July," replied Emily, surprised by the change of plans. "There was a leak to the press. Someone mentioned my grandmother's—" "I will. We need to reinforce the image of a happy couple immediately." That night, while packing a small suitcase, Emily found an envelope on her bed containing airline tickets and a handwritten note. "Bring simple clothes, A.G." The Grant family's private plane landed at Reno Tahoe International Airport the following morning. From there, a helicopter took them to Lake Tahoe, significantly reducing travel time. Emily, who had never flown in a private aircraft, much less a helicopter, maintained a serene countenance, although her stomach turned with each turbulence. "First time?" asked Alexander, noting Emily's white knuckles as she firmly held the seatbelt. "Is it that obvious?" she returned, trying to smile. For an instant, something resembling empathy crossed Alexander's gaze. "My first time in a helicopter was at 7. I cried so much that my father threatened to leave me on the island if I didn't stop." The unexpected confession, the first personal information Alexander had voluntarily shared, caught Emily by surprise. Before she could respond, the pilot announced they were approaching their destination. Contrary to what Emily imagined, they didn't land near a lakefront mansion, but at a simple helipad surrounded by native Sierra Nevada vegetation. A jeep awaited them, driven by a middle-aged man with sun-weathered skin. "Welcome back, Mr. Alexander," greeted the driver. "Mrs. Martha is anxious about your arrival. It's been a while since you've been here." "Thank you, Samuel. This is my wife, Emily." "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Emily. The lake has been waiting for you." As the jeep advanced along a dirt road through the lush vegetation, Emily observed the change in Alexander's behavior. His rigid posture seemed to have relaxed slightly, and his eyes surveyed the landscape with something close to nostalgia. "Expecting a luxury resort?" he asked, noticing Emily's curious look. "I confess I was. Doesn't your family have a lake house here?" "Yes, my parents have a mansion on the other side of the lake overlooking the yacht club, but that's not where we're going." After 20 minutes of travel, they arrived at a clearing where a complex of rustic buildings stood, perfectly integrated with nature. In the center, a main house of wood and stone with wide porches. Around it, small chalets and some larger, installations that looked like classrooms or workshops. "Welcome to Eleanor's Haven," announced Alexander. "My grandmother's secret project." A black woman with gray hair, dressed simply, approached with a warm smile. "Finally, you've brought your wife to see our little corner, Alexander. Mrs. Eleanor would be so happy." "Mrs. Martha is the Haven's administrator," explained Alexander. "She's worked with my grandmother since this was just abandoned land. Come, come, Lunch is almost ready, and the children are eager to meet the teacher who won our Alexander's heart. Children? Asked Emily, confused. As they walked to the main house, Alexander explained, Eleanor's Haven was a shelter and education center for children and adolescents in vulnerable situations, many of them orphans or victims of abandonment. It also functioned as a technical school, offering courses in ecotourism, sustainable agriculture, and crafts, all discreetly financed by Mrs. Grant, without any official connection to Grant Enterprises. My grandmother created this place 15 years ago. She came here whenever she could, away from the spotlight. It was her refuge, and mine too, when I was a child. Lunch was served on the porch of the main house, with a view of the lake that shimmered in the distance between the treetops. The simple but abundant table gathered dishes made with ingredients grown in the Haven's own garden. Gradually, children and adolescents approached, at first shy, then increasingly at ease, especially with Emily, who showed genuine interest in their stories. Alexander said you're a teacher, commented a boy of approximately 12 years. Will, you teach us too? Well, of course she will, Ryan, intervened Alexander, surprising Emily. My wife is a specialist in creative educational projects. I'm sure she'll have much to share during our stay. The look Emily gave Alexander was a mixture of confusion and challenge. He responded with a slight shrug, as if to say, We're improvising, aren't we? After lunch, Mrs. Martha led them to a secluded cabin with a privileged view of a small cove. This was Mrs. Eleanor's cabin. She left specific instructions for you to stay here. The interior was cozy and unpretentious. A living room with comfortable sofas, American kitchen, a bedroom with a double bed, and a bathroom with an antique clawfoot tub. On the walls, black and white photographs depicted the evolution of the Haven over the years. In several of them appeared a teenage Alexander, smiling, helping in the construction of the facilities or playing with the children. You looked happy, commented Emily, observing one particular photo where Alexander, about 16 years old, was teaching a boy to fish. It was another time, he replied dryly, averting his gaze. I'm going to take a shower. You can choose which side of the bed you prefer. What do you mean? I thought... There's only one bed, Emily, and the walls here are thin. If we want our farce to be convincing, we need to share the room. Without waiting for a response, Alexander picked up his suitcase and headed to the bathroom. Emily stood in the middle of the living room, suddenly feeling vulnerable. Physical proximity wasn't part of her considerations about this marriage of convenience. The following days established an unexpected routine. In the morning, Emily helped with Portuguese and arts classes for the children, while Alexander, against all expectations, engaged in practical work around the Haven, fixing roofs, helping in the garden, fishing with the teenagers. In the afternoon, they usually separated. Emily continued with educational activities, while Alexander retreated to make some work calls, although the internet connection on the lake was precarious. On the third day, during a heavy rain that cancelled outdoor activities, Emily found Alexander in the cabin's living room contemplating the stormy lake through the window with a cup of coffee in his hands. I never imagined this place existed, she commented, breaking the silence. Why? Keep it a secret? Alexander continued looking at the horizon as he replied, My father considers social projects as inefficient charity. He allowed the Grant Foundation only for corporate image reasons, but with controlled budget and focus on initiatives that generate media return. This here, he made a gesture encompassing the Haven, would be considered a waste of money. And you? What do you think? The question hung in the air for a few moments, as if Alexander were really considering his answer, instead of offering an automatic reaction. When I was a teenager, this was the only place where I felt real. My grandmother brought me here during school vacations, without my parents knowing. She said she needed my help, but now I understand she wanted to show me a different reality. And did it work? Alexander finally turned to face her. For the first time since they met, his gaze seemed disarmed. For a while. Then came Harvard, Stanford, the pressure to take over the company. It's easy to forget certain things when you're surrounded by people who only care about financial results. That night, During the community dinner in the dining hall, one of the teenagers, Julia, timidly approached the table where Alexander and Emily were sitting. "Mr. Alexander, you promised 3 years ago that you would help me with my college application when I was in my senior year, remember?" The astonishment on Alexander's face was visible. "You're already in your senior year, Julia? But you were just a little girl." "I'm 17 now, sir, and I still want to study environmental engineering. Like we talked about during that fishing trip." Something broke in Alexander's facade. For a moment, he seemed genuinely shaken by the passage of time, by the forgotten promise, by the life that had continued in that haven while he sank into the corporate world. "Of course, Julia. Let's work on it tomorrow. Bring your texts and we'll look at them together." Later, returning to the cabin under a starry sky, walking side by side in silence, Emily felt Alexander's fingers lightly brush against hers. It wasn't a calculated gesture to keep up appearances. There was no one around. It was just a hesitant touch, almost involuntary, as if he were relearning the language of human contact. On the 5th day, an incident changed the dynamics between them. During a trail with the children to a nearby waterfall, little Matteo, 7 years old, slipped on a wet rock and fell into a deeper part of the river. Before anyone could react, Alexander had already dived in, reaching the boy and bringing him to the shore. Matteo was fine, just scared, but what impressed Emily was Alexander's instinctive reaction, not that of a calculating executive, but of someone who doesn't hesitate to put themselves at risk to protect a child. That night, as Emily applied ointment to the scrapes Alexander had suffered on the river rocks, the silence between them had a different quality. It was no longer the cold barrier of the first days, but something comfortable, almost intimate. "Thank you," he said when she finished the dressing. "No need to thank me. It's the least after what you did today." "I'm not referring just to that." Alexander hesitated, as if the words he needed to say were in a language he didn't completely master. "Thank you for being here, for being patient with the children, for not judging this place." The look they exchanged contained the mutual recognition that something was changing between them, slowly, like a tide that rises almost imperceptibly, until suddenly, the beach is no longer the same. On the morning of the 6th day, the Haven's satellite phone rang. It was from the central office of Grant Enterprises in Portland. An emergency required Alexander's immediate presence. One of the main competitors was attempting a hostile acquisition of a company strategic to the group. "I need to return today," announced Alexander, as Emily helped him hurriedly pack his suitcase. "You can stay if you want. Samuel will take you back to Portland at the end of the week." "No, I'll go with you," she replied, surprising herself with the decision. "This is a family matter, after all." The helicopter arrived 2 hours later. The goodbyes were hurried but emotional. The children embraced Emily as if they had known her for years, not days. Mrs. Martha whispered in her ear, "You're doing him good. Don't give up." In the helicopter, as they flew over the lake that quickly diminished below them, Alexander seemed to have rebuilt his corporate armor. Phone already in hand, giving precise instructions to his team, his voice resuming the authoritarian tone. The transformation was so complete that Emily wondered if she had imagined the moments of connection in the past few days. When they landed in Portland, a limousine was already waiting for them. Before entering the car, Alexander turned to Emily. "We're back to reality now. What happened at the lake was just part of the agreement," she completed, anticipating his words. "I know." The journey to the Grant mansion was made in silence. When they arrived, Alexander quickly got out, followed by Emily. At the door, he paused briefly as if wanting to say something, but changed his mind. With a curt nod to the driver, he entered the house and went straight to his office, leaving Emily standing in the entrance hall like a visitor in her own home. Later that same night, Margaret found Emily in the library, distractedly leafing through an old photo album of the Grant family. "He was always like that," commented the housekeeper, sitting next to Emily. "Starts to open up, to show who he really is, and then retreats behind his walls. He's been like that since he was a boy." Why are you telling me this, Margaret? The housekeeper smiled wisely. Because I saw how he looked at you at the lake. Mrs. Eleanor called me every day to tell me, and I've also seen how you look at him, even when you think no one is watching. You're mistaken, protested Emily, feeling her face flush. This marriage is just a business agreement. In a few months it will be over. If you say so. Margaret stood up, adjusting her apron. But remember, Mrs. Eleanor never chose the easiest path, only the right path, and she chose you for a reason. After Margaret's departure, Emily remained in the library, absorbing the silence of the mansion and the disturbing revelation that, in just 6 days at Lake Tahoe, her certainties about Alexander Grant and about her own feelings had been completely shaken. The weeks following the return from Lake Tahoe were marked by an increasing distance between Emily and Alexander. The corporate crisis that had brought him back to Portland proved more complex than anticipated, resulting in sleepless nights at the office and constant travel. When he was at the mansion, Alexander shut himself in his private office, emerging only for hurried meals before plunging back into work. Emily, in turn, resumed her activities at the West Side School, now as the CEO's wife, a title that caused her constant discomfort, especially in the face of curious and sometimes envious looks from some colleagues. The students, however, continued to treat her as the same teacher Emily as always, which brought some relief to her new and confusing reality. It was on an August morning, during coffee, that Emily felt the first nausea. She initially attributed it to the stress of recent weeks, the forced public appearances, the incessant press coverage of the fairy tale of her marriage, the silent pressure from the Grant family. But when the morning sickness persisted for a week, accompanied by unusual fatigue, the possibility she was reluctant to consider became undeniable. It's late, she noted, checking her calendar for the 3rd time that day. She tried to remember the nights at Lake Tahoe, the shared cabin, the barriers that had fallen between them amid the tropical rain and the sound of waves breaking in the cove. With trembling hands, she went to a pharmacy in a distant neighborhood. Where she was unlikely to be recognized, she bought 3 different pregnancy tests, feeling like a frightened teenager, not an adult, married woman with financial stability. Back at the mansion, she locked herself in the bathroom of her suite and performed the tests one after the other, as if repetition could alter the result. All positive. She sat on the cold marble floor, her back against the bathtub, absorbing the magnitude of that revelation. A child of Alexander Grant, a child conceived not out of love, but during an interlude of vulnerability in a fabricated marriage. "What am I going to do?" she murmured to the emptiness of the luxurious bathroom. The obvious answer was to tell Alexander. It was his right to know. But each time Emily mentally rehearsed the conversation, the image of the cold and distant executive of recent days replaced that of the man she had met at Lake Tahoe. How would he react? Would he consider the pregnancy a coup, a deliberate attempt to force the continuation of a marriage that, by contract, should end in less than 3 months? She decided to wait for the appropriate moment, for an instant of connection that would remind her of the days at the lake. But the moment never came. The following weeks witnessed an Alexander increasingly absorbed in corporate matters, a man who seemed to have completely erased from memory the days when he had helped children fish and fixed roofs under the sun. On tea, a particularly tense Friday, Emily finally gathered courage. She asked Margaret to prepare Alexander's favorite dinner, risotto with shrimp and Meyer lemon, and set the table in the rarely used intimate dining room with candles and flowers. She wore one of the dresses Judith had chosen for her, let her hair loose, and waited. At 9 o'clock, the cell phone rang. It was Alexander advising that he wouldn't return home. An emergency meeting with foreign investors required his presence until late. He hung up before Emily could mention she had something important to tell him. "You should eat something," suggested Margaret, finding Emily still sitting at the untouched table, the candles already half melted. "It's not good for the baby to go without food." The shock on Emily's face was immediate. "How did you—" "You should eat something," suggested Margaret, finding Emily still sitting at the untouched table, the candles already half melted. "It's not good for the baby to go without food." The shock on Emily's face was immediate. How did you? I've worked in family homes my whole life, my dear. I recognize the signs, and I also recognize when a woman needs support. The housekeeper sat beside Emily, taking her hands in hers. Mrs. Eleanor would have been so happy. The gentle words triggered the tears Emily had been suppressing for weeks. Between sobs, she confessed her fears, that Alexander would accuse her of manipulation, that the child would grow up in a family without love, that everything she had built professionally would be overshadowed by the stigma of fortune hunter already circulating in some social circles. You need to tell him, said Margaret firmly, not because it's an obligation, but because it's his right to know, and your right not to carry this burden alone. The next morning, determined, Emily went to the central office of Grant Enterprises in Portland's financial district. She rarely went there, preferring to keep her distance from the corporate world that represented everything she questioned. In the immense marble and glass lobby, she was greeted with polite smiles and curious looks from employees. Mrs. Grant greeted the receptionist. Mr. Alexander didn't inform us he was expecting you today. It's a surprise, replied Emily, trying to sound more confident than she felt. She was escorted to the executive floor, where Alexander's personal assistant Caroline received her, with polite coldness. I'm sorry, ma'am, but Mr. Alexander is in a video conference with our Asian partners. He cannot be interrupted. I'll wait, replied Emily, sitting on one of the leather sofas in the anteroom. After an hour, Caroline approached. Again, Mr. Alexander's schedule is completely filled today. Perhaps it would be better for you to return another day. I can schedule an appointment for next week. The calculated formality, the barrier deliberately erected between her and the man who was legally her husband, ignited a spark of indignation in Emily. Without responding to Caroline, she walked directly to the door of Alexander's office and opened it without knocking. The executive was standing by the window, cell phone to his eye, ear back turned to the door. Hearing the door open, he turned with visible irritation, which transformed into surprise upon seeing Emily. I need to talk to you, she said, holding his gaze. I'll call you back, Alexander said into the phone, then hung up. What happened? Why are you here? I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air-conditioned minimalist office between the two of them like a tangible truth, impossible to ignore or deny. Alexander remained motionless, his face an indecipherable mask. Are you sure? He finally asked, his voice low. Absolutely. 3 tests and a blood test. Alexander walked to his desk, leaning on it as if he suddenly needed support. How long? Approximately 10 weeks. Lake Tahoe. The mention of the lake seemed to trigger something in Alexander. An emotion Emily couldn't identify crossed his face before he regained control. I see. This complicates things. Complicates? Is that all you have to say? Emily's voice trembled slightly, but she maintained her composure. I'm not asking for anything, Alexander. I just thought you should. Hanso, we need to think calmly, he continued, now in an analytical tone. The contract ends in less than 2 months. That means we would have to... He abruptly stopped, realizing the coldness of his own words. I'm sorry. That was... inappropriate. It was exactly what I expected from you, replied Emily, moving toward the door. Just numbers and clauses. I only came to inform you because I believe it's your right to know. What you'll do with that information is your problem. Before she could leave, Alexander called her. Emily, wait, it's not that simple. I never said it was simple. But it also doesn't need to be just a logistical problem to be solved. She faced him directly. When we were at the lake, I thought I had met the man behind the executive. I see I was mistaken. She left the office without looking back, ignoring the gazes of employees who certainly had heard part of the conversation. In the elevator, she took a deep breath, trying to contain the tears that threatened to fall. She wouldn't cry there. She wouldn't give that pleasure to the gossips who must already be sending messages through the corporate corridors. Upon arriving home, she found a voice message from Alexander. informing that he needed to travel urgently to New York, where he would remain for at least 2 weeks. "We'll talk when I return," promised the metallic voice of the recording. "We need to resolve this adequately." "Resolve," repeated Emily to the emptiness of the mansion, as if a child were a contractual problem to be solved. That night, while organizing some documents in the office she used in the mansion, she found an envelope falling from inside a book. It contained airline tickets to Seattle and a reservation at a bed and breakfast in Friday Harbor, a small town in the San Juan Islands. Alongside, a card with the elegant calligraphy of Mrs. Grant. "For when you need peace, use when you feel the time is right." The discovery seemed almost providential. Friday Harbor was known for its tranquil beaches and welcoming environment, very different from Portland's hustle and bustle. Suddenly, Emily felt she couldn't continue in the mansion, surrounded by memories of a relationship that had never truly existed, and by the expectation of the return of a man who saw his child as a complication. She made her decision in a matter of hours. With Margaret's discreet help, she organized a small suitcase with the essentials. She wrote a letter to Alexander, explaining that she needed time and space to think about the future, hers and the child's. She made it clear that she would not request anything beyond what was already provided in the original contract, and that she would not use the pregnancy as an instrument of blackmail or pressure. "I'll be fine," she assured Margaret, who embraced her with teary eyes at the mansion door. "He'll look for you," warned the housekeeper. "Maybe, but first he needs to find himself." The next morning, Emily boarded the flight to Seattle. As the plane took off, she gently caressed her still imperceptible belly under the light dress. "It's just us now, little one, at least for now." What Emily couldn't imagine was that at the exact moment she was leaving Portland, the first of many sensationalist headlines graced the cover of a popular tabloid. "Pregnancy of convenience. The strategy of the teacher who conquered the Grant Empire." The photo illustrating the article showed Emily leaving the clinic where she had taken the blood test days before. A few miles away, at the central office of Grant Enterprises, Mark Grant, Alexander's cousin, observed the headline with a satisfied smile. Beside him, Caroline, Alexander's personal assistant, received a thick envelope. "Excellent work," praised Mark. "Continue informing me about all the steps of my dear cousin and his interesting wife." In New York, isolated in a hotel executive suite, Alexander Grant stared fixedly at the screen of his laptop, where the image of an ultrasound revealed a small form that would soon change his life forever, in ways that not even he could predict. The small town of Friday Harbor welcomed Emily with the tranquility her spirit needed. The bed and breakfast reserved by Mrs. Grant was near the historic center, a rustic cottage surrounded by flowery gardens, managed by a retired couple who received Emily as if she were family. "Mrs. Eleanor told us one day you would come," said Mr. Joseph, the owner, while carrying Emily's small suitcase to the room on the second floor. "We just didn't expect you would be accompanied." He smiled discreetly, looking at the guest's still imperceptible belly. Emily blushed. "How did... you know? My wife Abigail has a sixth sense for these things. She raised 5 children and helped bring more than a dozen grandchildren into the world. She said she recognized the glow in your eyes as soon as you got out of the taxi." The room was simple but cozy, a double bed with a handmade quilt, lace, curtains on windows that opened to a view of the sea in the distance, a small dark wood desk and a private bathroom. On the walls, watercolors depicting local landscapes brought color and warmth to the environment. "Mrs. Eleanor said you would need peace, but also purpose," continued Mr. Joseph, placing the suitcase on an upholstered bench at the foot of the bed. "So she spoke with the principal of the local public school. They're in need of a substitute teacher for the rest of the semester, if you're interested, of course." The prospect of resuming classroom work, away from the curious looks and judgments of Portland, brought immediate relief to Emily. In the first days, she allowed herself just to rest, long walks on the deserted beach, reading on the porch of the bed and breakfast, unpretentious conversations with Abigail while helping prepare homemade sweets for the guests' breakfast. She avoided newspapers and television, instinctively protecting herself from the outside world. Her cell phone remained off most of the time, being turned on only for quick, reassuring messages to Margaret. In the second week, she visited Friday Harbor Elementary School, where she was received by Principal Meredith, an energetic, middle-aged woman who didn't hide her enthusiasm upon meeting her. "Mrs. Eleanor spoke a lot about your work in Portland," said Meredith, leading her through the colorful corridors of the school. "We have a fifth-grade class without a teacher since last month, when Mrs. Claudia had to take leave due to health problems. They're wonderful children, but in need of consistent guidance." Upon entering the classroom and seeing the curious faces of the children, Emily felt at home for the first time since she had left Portland. There she was just teacher Emily, not the wife of the powerful businessman, not the protagonist of an arranged marriage, not the woman who graced tabloids with sensationalist headlines. "Good morning, class," she said with a genuine smile. "My name is Emily Reynolds, and I'll be your teacher until the end of the semester." The deliberate omission of the surname Grant was the first step toward building her new life in Friday Harbor. In the days that followed, she plunged into work with renewed enthusiasm, developing creative projects that soon caught the attention not only of students but of the entire school community. Her regional literature project, which encouraged children to collect stories from local fishermen and artisans, culminated in a small publication that was distributed at the town's festival. As her belly grew, Emily found in the school routine and in the welcome of the small community the emotional stability she so needed. Abigail became her confidant and informal advisor on maternity matters. Mr. Joseph insisted on accompanying her to medical appointments in the neighboring town, concerned about her safety. "I'll need a bigger place soon," commented Emily during dinner, when she completed 4 months of pregnancy. "I can't continue occupying the room at the bed and breakfast indefinitely." "As it happens," replied Mr. Joseph, exchanging complicit looks with his wife, "we have a small house at the back of the property. Nothing luxurious, but it has 2 bedrooms, a kitchen and a small garden. Our oldest son lived there before moving to Olympia. It's been empty for almost a year." The small house proved perfect. A simple brick construction, painted light blue with white windows and a porch covered by flowering vines. With the help of Mr. Joseph and some friends she had made at the school, Emily transformed the abandoned space into a welcoming home, decorated with simple furniture acquired at thrift stores and local crafts. The second bedroom, intended for the baby, was painted in soft shades of green and yellow. Emily had opted not to know the child's sex before birth. On a rainy November afternoon, while organizing some baby clothes she had bought at the artisanal fair, Emily was surprised by a knock at the door. Upon opening it, she found Margaret with a small suitcase in hand and teary eyes. "Margaret, what are you doing here? How did you find me?" "Mrs. Eleanor told me about this place years ago," replied the housekeeper, entering the house after a tight hug with Emily. "She said it would be your refuge if necessary. I came because I needed to see you, and because things are complicated in Portland." Seated in the small living room with the sound of rain as background, Margaret told of the events of the past months. The slanderous headlines about Emily had multiplied, fueled by anonymous sources within Grant Enterprises. Her character was questioned, her pregnancy portrayed as a calculated coup, her absence interpreted as proof of guilt. "And Alexander?" asked Emily, trying to keep her voice firm. "What does he say about all this? We hardly see him at the mansion. Since he returned from New York, he's immersed himself in work like never before. He seems like a man haunted by his own ghosts." Margaret paused, as if measuring her next words. "He looked for you, you know. He hired private investigators. But well, let's say I made their work a bit difficult." Emily smiled, imagining loyal Margaret misleading professional detectives. "Thank you for that. I'm not ready to face him. Not yet." "There's one more thing you need to know," continued Margaret, with a grave expression. "It's about his cousin, Mark. I overheard a conversation between him and Caroline, Alexander's assistant. It was he who leaked the news of your pregnancy to the press. It seems he's articulating something against Alexander on the board, using your absence as proof of emotional instability." The revelation didn't completely surprise Emily. She had always sensed an air of falsity in Mark, even in the few encounters they had. What concerned her now were the implications of this conspiracy for her child's future. A Grant heir, whether she wanted it or not. Margaret stayed for 3 days, helping to finish preparations for the baby's arrival and bringing a connection with the life Emily had left behind. On the eve of her departure, she gave Emily a package wrapped in brown paper. "These are Mrs. Eleanor's diaries," she explained. "She left instructions for them to be delivered to you when you were expecting." Alexander's child. How could she have known? "That lady saw further than all of us," replied Margaret with an enigmatic smile. After Margaret's departure, Emily immersed herself in reading the diaries, 5 leather-bound notebooks filled with the matriarch's elegant calligraphy. The first entries dated from more than 30 years ago, when Alexander was just a boy. Through those pages, Emily met an Alexander completely different from the man she had married, a sensitive and curious child, passionate about music and natural history, who dreamed of being an oceanographer. "Alexander played piano for me today," read an entry from when he was 9 years old. "Chopin, his favorite. Robert and Judith insist it's a waste of time, that he should focus on useful studies to take over the company one day. They don't realize they're killing something precious in their own son." Subsequent entries documented the gradual transformation of the dreamy boy into the pragmatic adult. Music lessons replaced by finance courses, explorative summers at Lake Tahoe exchanged for internships at international banks. Natural curiosity suffocated by the weight of family expectations. "Alexander smiled today. For the first time in months," said an entry from when he was 17. "It was during our secret visit to the Haven. Away from his parents, he seems to return to being himself. I worry what will become of him when I'm no longer here to show him that there is life beyond the walls of the Grant Empire." The most recent entries from the last years of Mrs. Grant's life revealed her growing concern for her grandson, now a relentless and emotionally isolated CEO, and her search for someone who could save him from himself, as she had written. "I met a young teacher today," read the entry from the day Mrs. Grant had first visited Emily's school. "There's something in her eyes, a quiet strength, a rare integrity. She reminds me of myself before the business world hardened my heart. I wonder if she would be capable of seeing beyond the armor Alexander has built." The last entry, dated just 2 weeks before her departure, was addressed directly to Emily. "If you're reading this, my dear, it's because my intuitions were correct. You and Alexander have generated a new life, a new beginning for the Grant family. It won't be easy. My grandson was trained to distrust love, to see human relationships as transactions. But you, Emily, possess what he most needs, the ability to see the man behind the executive. Don't give up on him easily. Not for me, not for the empire, not even for him, but for the child you carry, who deserves to know the father Alexander could have been to him and still can be." The next morning, she woke up with mild contractions. The doctor had predicted the birth in 2 weeks, but apparently the baby had other plans. With the calm that characterized her actions, Emily called Mr. Joseph, who had been on standby for days, with the car fueled and a route traced to the regional hospital. "Everything will be all right, my dear," assured Abigail, accompanying her to the car. "We'll be waiting for both of you to return." The labor lasted 14 hours. Alone except for the medical team and a kind doula that the hospital made available, Emily faced each contraction with the silent strength that had always characterized her. When she finally heard her son's first cry at 3:27 in the morning, tears of relief and unconditional love bathed her exhausted face. "It's a beautiful, healthy boy," announced the obstetrician, placing the newborn on her chest. "What will you name him?" Looking at the little red face and the half-closed eyes that she could already tell had the shape of Alexander's, Emily felt that the name she had chosen months before was indeed the perfect one. "William," she replied, in honor of the man who had become a father figure in her new life. "William Reynolds Grant." 3 days later, already settled at home with little William, Emily received a visit from Principal Meredith, bringing not only gifts for the baby, but also an unexpected proposal. The Department of Education approved our comprehensive education project, she announced while observing the baby asleep in the crib. We need someone to coordinate the implementation, someone with experience in innovative projects and commitment to the community. The offer represented more than a job. It was the opportunity to build something meaningful, to apply on a larger scale the ideas she had developed throughout her career. With William in her arms, Emily felt she had finally found her place in the world, not as the wife of a magnate, but as an educator and mother in a community that valued her for her own merits. The weeks turned into months. William grew strong and healthy, with his father's dark, penetrating eyes and his mother's warm smile. Emily divided her time between caring for her son and the new educational project, which quickly became a reference in the region. At night, sometimes, she caught herself looking at the phone, considering the possibility of calling Alexander, of informing him about his son. But something always held her back, perhaps the fear of destroying the peace she had built, perhaps uncertainty about how he would react, perhaps the still latent pain of abandonment. It was on a sunny May afternoon, when William was completing 6 months, that the past finally caught up with her. During the inauguration of the school's new arts pavilion, sponsored by local entrepreneurs, Emily was speaking to a small crowd of parents, educators, and municipal authorities. William was in Abigail's arms, in the front row, charming everyone, with his smiles and gurgles. Upon finishing her speech and thanking the sponsors, Emily noticed a movement at the back of the auditorium. A tall man wearing an impeccable dark suit had just entered and was observing the scene with intensity. Even at a distance, she would recognize him anywhere. Alexander Grant had found his way to Friday Harbor. The world seemed to freeze at that instant. Emily felt her heart accelerate while trying to maintain composure before the audience still applauding her speech. With a final nod of thanks, she descended from the small, improvised stage, her legs trembling beneath the blue linen dress. She instinctively sought William with her gaze, locating him in Abigail's arms, oblivious to the emotional storm that was forming. Several people approached her with congratulations and questions about the project, involuntarily forming a human barrier between her and Alexander. Through the gaps between the guests, she could see him standing in the same place without making any movement to approach, just observing with that characteristic intensity that always disconcerted her. "Are you okay, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost," commented Meredith, lightly touching her arm. "In a way I have," replied Emily, without taking her eyes off the figure in the back. "Meredith, could you do me a favor? Ask Abigail to take William home. Tell them I'll join them soon." The principal followed her gaze and, although she didn't know Alexander personally, understanding illuminated her face. "It's him, isn't it? William's father." Emily nodded silently. "Do you want me to ask someone to escort him out?" offered Meredith protectively. "No, I need to do this alone. I've put it off for too long." When she finally managed to disentangle herself from the people, Alexander had moved to the school garden, contemplating a colorful mural painted by the students. Emily approached slowly, feeling each step as if she were walking through quicksand. "How did you find me?" she asked, stopping a few meters from him. Alexander turned, and Emily noted the changes in his appearance, deeper worry lines around his eyes, a slight graying at the temples that wasn't there before, a thinness that his impeccable suit couldn't completely disguise. "It wasn't easy," he replied, his voice hoarser than she remembered. "You chose your hiding place well." "It's not a hiding place, it's my home now." A heavy silence settled between them, loaded with unspoken words and unanswered questions. In the distance, the voices of guests leaving the event created a surreal contrast with the tension of the moment. "He's my son, isn't he?" Alexander finally asked, looking in the direction where Abigail was leaving with the baby. "I only caught a glimpse, but he has my family's eyes." "Yes, his name is William. He's 6 months old." Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the impact of that confirmation, despite already knowing it to be true. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you simply disappear?" I tried to tell you, replied Emily, keeping her voice low but firm. I went to your office, remember? You said my pregnancy complicated things. Then you traveled to New York without even discussing the matter. What did you expect me to do? Wait patiently until you decided how to solve the problem? I needed time to process the news, Alexander defended himself, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. You caught me completely off guard. I left the office that day to buy a ring, did you know? A real ring, not that contractual alliance we wore. I was going to propose that we continue married, not out of obligation, but because at Lake Tahoe I had begun to feel something. But when I returned, you had disappeared. The revelation hit Emily like an unexpected wave. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine how things would have been if she had waited, if she had given Alexander the chance he now claimed. And then came the headlines, he continued. Bitterness, evident in his voice. Accusations that you got pregnant on purpose to secure part of the fortune, that our marriage was a farce from the beginning. I thought perhaps it was true, that perhaps Lake Tahoe had been just part of your strategy. And you preferred to believe that rather than trust me, concluded Emily, feeling a renewed pang of disappointment, even after everything we experienced. I didn't know what to believe, exclaimed Alexander, his habitual composure momentarily broken. He lowered his voice, conscious of the public environment. All my life I was trained to distrust people's intentions, to see ulterior motives in every gesture. My father constantly repeated that, for someone in my position, trust was synonymous with weakness. And what brings you here now, after so long? Asked Emily, crossing her arms as if creating a physical barrier between them. Curiosity, sense of duty, or just the need to ensure your heir is being properly raised? Alexander took a step forward, reducing the distance between them. I came because I couldn't continue living as if you and my son didn't exist. Because I spent the last months trying to understand what happened to me at Lake Tahoe, why I went back to being the cold man everyone knows as soon as we returned to Portland. He paused as if searching for the right words. I came because I found my grandmother's diaries. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. You read them? Some of them. The ones she left in my office at the company, locked in a drawer with instructions to be opened when I was ready to hear the truth. Margaret gave me the key 3 months ago. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the garden trees, bringing the aroma of freshly planted flowers. Emily indicated a wooden bench under an apple tree. Can we sit? This conversation seems like it's going to be long. Side by side, but maintaining a calculated distance, they sat on the bench that had so often served as a stage for the stories Emily told her students. The contrast between this man in his Italian suit and the simple environment of the public school couldn't be greater. My grandmother's diaries showed me a boy I didn't recognize, began Alexander, looking at the horizon. A kid who loved music, who dreamed of studying the oceans, who cried in hiding when his father tore up his piano scores saying that "Grant men don't waste time on frivolities." She documented everything, each suffocated dream, each genuine interest replaced by leadership, lessons, each trait of sensitivity systematically removed, as if it were a character flaw. Your grandmother tried to protect you, commented Emily softly. The haven at Lake Tahoe, the secret trips, they were attempts to preserve something of the boy you were. And they failed, completed Alexander, with a heavy sigh. In the end, I became exactly what my father wanted, a relentless executive, capable of firing hundreds of employees without blinking, of ruining competitors without remorse, of seeing people as replaceable pieces in a large corporate machine. He turned to face her directly. That's what you saw in me from the beginning, wasn't it? The hollow man I became. I saw more than that, replied Emily, holding his gaze. At Lake Tahoe, I saw glimpses of the boy who's in your grandmother's diaries. I saw your gentleness with the children at the haven. I saw how you still remembered everyone's names, how you genuinely cared about their dreams, that Alexander didn't completely disappear. He was just silenced. A gleam of emotion crossed Alexander's eyes, quickly contained. In the last months, I've been trying to reconcile these two versions of myself, the executive I built And the man I could have been, it hasn't been easy. And your cousin Mark? Is he still conspiring against you? Asked Emily, remembering Margaret's revelations. A humorless smile crossed Alexander's face. Mark made a fatal mistake. He underestimated some people's loyalty. Caroline, my assistant, came to me with proof that he was manipulating information, leaking confidential data to the competition. He was also the one who planted stories about you in the press. And what happened? He was removed from the board and the company. Currently, he's facing lawsuits for breach of confidentiality and attempted corporate sabotage. Emily nodded slowly, processing the information. So, what exactly do you want from me, Alexander? From us? I want to know my son, he replied without hesitation. I want to be part of his life somehow. I'm not asking for us to return to what we had. I know I destroyed that possibility with my distrust, but I can't simply go back to Portland knowing I have a son here growing up without knowing me. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, considering the implications of that request. Part of her wanted to protect the bubble of tranquility she had created in Friday Harbor, keeping William away from the complications of the Grant world. Another part, however, knew that her son had the right to know his father, and Alexander, despite everything, had the right to be part of his son's life. It won't be simple, she finally said. I've built a life here, Alexander, a real life, with meaningful work and people who care about us for who we are. Not for the surname we carry or the bank account we have. I won't give that up. I'm not asking you to give up anything, he quickly replied, just to give me the chance to know William, to be his father, even if at a distance. At a distance? Questioned Emily, raising an eyebrow. How exactly would that work with you in Portland, immersed 24 hours a day in business and us here? Alexander hesitated, as if reaching the crucial point of his visit. Actually, I'm no longer in Portland, at least not permanently. What do you mean? I bought a house in Seattle 2 weeks ago. It's not a mansion, just a comfortable house with a view of the Sound. And I opened a satellite office of Grant Enterprises in the city to be able to manage some projects remotely. The revelation left Emily momentarily speechless. The idea of Alexander Grant, the relentless CEO, moving to a small city just to be close to the son he barely knew, seemed surreal. You moved here? Left Portland? For William? For William, he confirmed. And perhaps also for myself. I never told anyone, but I always hated that mansion in Portland. Too big, too cold, full of memories of a father who was never satisfied, and a mother who preferred her social causes to her own family. At Lake Tahoe at the Haven, I felt at peace for the first time in years. I thought that perhaps living in a place like this, I could find that feeling again. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky with orange tones. In the distance, the school bell rang, announcing the end of the day's activities. Emily stood up, adjusting her dress. I need to go home. William will want to be fed soon. Alexander also stood, uncertain about how to proceed. Can I see him? Not today, if it's not convenient, but soon. Emily studied the man before her, no longer the arrogant executive from the beginning of their marriage, nor completely the vulnerable man from Lake Tahoe, but something in between. A man in the process of rediscovery, trying to reconnect with long-forgotten parts of himself. Tomorrow, she decided. Come to my house at 10 in the morning. William is usually more disposed at that time. The relief on Alexander's face was palpable. Thank you. I won't disappoint you, I promise. Don't make promises you're not sure you can keep, warned Emily, softly. Just come meet your son. The rest, we'll decide with time. The next morning, punctually, at 10 o'clock, Alexander knocked at the door of the small blue house. He wore notably more casual clothes, dark jeans and a white linen shirt, and brought in his arms a package wrapped in colorful paper. Emily received him with William in her arms. The baby, wearing a yellow romper, observed the visitor with curious eyes, the same dark, intense eyes that Alexander saw every morning in the mirror. Hi, said Alexander, his voice suddenly hoarse with emotion. You must be William." "The baby," responded with an animated babble, extending a chubby little hand in the direction of the colorful package. "It's for him," explained Alexander, giving the present to Emily. "I hope he likes it." Inside the wrapping was a small toy piano made of solid wood, with keys that produced soft and melodious sounds. "My grandmother gave me an identical one when I was about his age," explained Alexander, as Emily placed the instrument on the living room rug. "It was my favorite toy until your father considered it inappropriate," completed Emily, remembering the diaries. Alexander nodded, a sad smile playing on his lips. "I want William to have choices I didn't have." They sat on the rug, watching the baby, who quickly became enchanted with the new toy, randomly hitting the keys with a concentrated expression. For almost an hour, they talked about trivialities: William's first months, his preferences, his small developmental milestones. Alexander listened with genuine attention, memorizing each detail, occasionally risking touching his son's little hand or caressing his dark hair. "He has your smile," commented Alexander at a certain point, "and your heart, I hope." "He has a bit of both of us," replied Emily, "and a lot of himself. He's already a complete person, you know, with his own personality, well-defined opinions about what he wants and doesn't want." "Like his mother, then," joked Alexander, and, for an instant, they shared a complicit smile that reminded them of the days at Lake Tahoe. When William began to show signs of tiredness, Emily took him to the bedroom, returning a few minutes later to find Alexander observing the photographs on the shelf, images of William at different moments, of Emily with her students, of Mr. Joseph and Abigail. "You built a beautiful life here," he commented, with a note of admiration in his voice. "I did," agreed Emily. "It's not luxurious or extraordinary, but it's authentic. It's real." "It's more than I can say about my own life in recent years," confessed Alexander, returning to sit on the simple sofa. "But I'm trying to change that." The midday sun entered through the open windows, bringing the aroma of Emily's garden, basil, rosemary, and the roses that Mr. Joseph had insisted on planting for her. In that moment of quietude, with the soft sound of William's breathing coming through the baby monitor, something indefinable changed between them. Not a complete reconciliation nor an instant forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of an understanding. "Can I come back tomorrow?" asked Alexander, preparing to leave. "I'd like to get to know him better, and you too, if you'll allow me." Emily hesitated for only a moment. "Yes, you can come back, but Alexander, let's take it slow, okay? For William, and for us. For William," he agreed, briefly holding the hand she extended to him, "and for everything we can still be." As she watched Alexander walk down the quiet street of Friday Harbor, Emily couldn't avoid the feeling that they were on the threshold of something new, not a return to the complicated past they shared, but perhaps the beginning of a future that neither had imagined when they signed that marriage contract so many months ago, under the shadow of Mrs. Eleanor Grant's last wishes. Autumn transformed Friday Harbor into a palette of golds and reds. The mornings became cooler, the sky more dramatic, with dense clouds that occasionally discharged quick and intense rains, leaving the air with that peculiar aroma of wet earth and renewal. In the 3 weeks that followed Emily and Alexander's reunion, an unexpected routine established itself between them, not that of a reconciled couple, but of two people rediscovering each other through the sun they shared. Alexander appeared every day, usually in the morning, bringing small presents for William, colorful books, building blocks, toy musical instruments. At the beginning, the baby observed him with the natural distrust of one who encounters a stranger. Gradually, however, the reserve transformed into curiosity and eventually into expectation, the little face lighting up when he heard the familiar knock at the door. "Baba!" babbled William one morning, extending his little arms in Alexander's direction, who had just arrived. "Is he trying to say Daddy?" asked Alexander to Emily, a rare vulnerability transparent in his voice. "I think so," she replied, observing how William naturally cuddled in his father's arms. "He's perceptive. He feels that you belong in his life." Those words, "You belong," hung between them like an unspoken promise. Belonging. It was something Alexander had sought his entire life, without ever admitting it, even to himself. The days gained their own cadence. In the morning, Alexander visited William, sometimes taking him for small walks around the central square of Friday Harbour, always under Emily's attentive gaze, who accompanied them at a discreet distance. In the afternoon, while William napped, Alexander returned to his office in Seattle, connecting with the corporate world that now seemed as distant as Portland. On a particularly beautiful afternoon, as they walked along the shore after a shared lunch at the small blue house, Alexander surprised Emily with a revelation. "I'm considering transforming Eleanor's Haven into an official educational foundation," he commented while they watched William play with the beach sand. "Something that can grow, replicate in other regions, impact more children." "It would be a beautiful tribute to your grandmother," replied Emily, genuinely touched by the idea. She always believed in education's transformative power. "I'd like you to participate," continued Alexander, looking at her intensely, "not as an employee or consultant, but as a partner. No one understands innovative educational projects better than you." The invitation reverberated in Emily in contradictory ways. On one hand, the possibility of expanding the impact of her work, of touching the lives of more children, was tempting. On the other, accepting it would mean reconnecting to the grant world, something she had deliberately left behind. "You don't need to answer now," added Alexander, noticing her hesitation. "It's just an idea. But think about it, please." That night, after putting William to sleep, Emily sat on the porch of her house, contemplating the stars that stood out in the clear sky. Alexander's proposal had awakened something she had tried to ignore in the past weeks, the fact that, despite all her determination to remain independent, their lives were inevitably intertwined through William. More than that, Alexander's constant presence was gradually dissolving the barriers she had erected against him, against the feelings she was reluctant to admit. The next morning, while preparing coffee, she was surprised by the unexpected arrival of Margaret, accompanied by Dr. Hayes, Mrs. Grant's personal lawyer. "Forgive the unannounced visit," apologized the lawyer after the greetings and warm hugs. "But the matter that brings me here is urgent and involves not only you but also Alexander." "He'll come in less than an hour," informed Emily, indicating the living room sofa. "Can we wait for him? William is still asleep." Dr. Hayes agreed, accepting the cup of coffee offered to him. Margaret, meanwhile, marveled at the changes in Emily's appearance, the serenity in her gaze, the lightness in her movements, as if she had found a balance that had eluded her in Portland. "Friday. Harbour has done you good," commented the housekeeper, holding Emily's hands in hers. "You're radiant." When Alexander arrived, precisely at 10 o'clock, his expression of surprise at seeing Margaret and Dr. Hayes quickly transformed into concern. "Did something happen in Portland?" he asked, after embracing Margaret with unusual affection. "In a way, yes," replied Dr. Hayes, removing a folder from his briefcase. "It concerns the conclusion of Mrs. Eleanor's will. As you know, the main conditions have already been met. The marriage performed, the minimum period respected. The company shares were transferred to Alexander, as stipulated. However, there was an additional clause sealed that could only be opened when two conditions were met: the birth of an heir and the family's reunion after a period of separation." "How could she have known?" began Alexander, perplexed. "Your grandmother was an extraordinary woman," interrupted Margaret with an enigmatic smile. "She saw further than all of us." Dr. Hayes opened the folder, removing a sealed envelope with the Grant family crest. "This is the final document written by Mrs. Eleanor herself. She requested that I read it to you personally when the time came." At that moment, William's cry echoed through the baby monitor. Emily rose to fetch him, returning minutes later with the sleepy baby in her arms. Alexander automatically extended his arms, and William, recognizing him, happily passed to his father's lap. The scene, Alexander holding his son with naturalness, Emily seated beside him on the sofa, Margaret observing with maternal approval, seemed the exact personification of what Mrs. Grant had visualized, thought Dr. Hayes, as he opened the sealed envelope. My dear Alexander and Emily, he began reading, if you are hearing these words, it's because my deepest hopes have been realized. You have not only fulfilled the formal conditions of my will, but have found something much more valuable along the way, a genuine connection sealed by the birth of a new generation of the Grant family. Alexander and Emily exchanged surprised looks. How could Mrs. Grant have anticipated with such precision the course of their lives? I ask forgiveness for the manipulation, the letter continued. Using a will to force a union may seem cruel or even desperate. Perhaps it's both. But knowing my grandson as I do, his tendency to hide behind walls of isolation, his distrust, learned from a father who confused harshness with strength, I knew that only extraordinary circumstances could compel him to open himself to true love. William, as if sensing the importance of the moment, remained extraordinarily quiet in his father's lap, his attentive little eyes alternating between the faces of the adults around him. And Emily, Dr. Hayes continued, from our first meeting, I recognized in you the rare combination of firmness and compassion that my grandson desperately needed. Not to fix him, no human being can or should fix another, but to show him through your example that there is strength in vulnerability, power in kindness. Silent tears streamed down Emily's face. Beside her, Alexander remained motionless, except for the hand that instinctively caressed his son's back. Now we come to the final part of my plan, or perhaps it's more appropriate to call it my dream for you. The shares of Grant Enterprises were transferred to Alexander, as promised. However, I also leave a property in Friday Harbor that I secretly acquired years ago, anticipating this moment. A house by the sea, not far from where you probably are now, with enough space for a family, a music studio, and a garden where children can grow free. Margaret smiled, as if confirming long-held knowledge. Dr. Hayes removed a smaller envelope from the folder, giving it to Alexander. The deed is in both your names, Alexander and Emily, as a symbol of the partnership I hope you have built. But there is a final condition. The property can only be inhabited if both of you freely choose to remain together, not out of obligation, not for William's sake, not for my memory, but because you found in each other what I found in my William. A home for the soul. Dr. Hayes paused, turning the page to read the final paragraph. If you choose separate paths, the property will be converted into an extension of Eleanor's Haven, an educational space for children of the region. There is no wrong choice here, only what is true for you. This is my true legacy, my dears. Not the financial empire, not the properties or the Grant name, but the freedom to choose love above all conveniences and conventions. With eternal affection, Eleanor. The silence that followed the reading had an almost sacred quality. Outside, the sea whispered against the sand. Birds sang in the branches of the fruit trees. Life continued its imperturbable course. She planned everything, finally murmured Alexander, his voice thick with emotion. From the beginning. Not everything, gently corrected Margaret. She created opportunities, opened doors, but the choices were yours, the love that grew between you, that not even Mrs. Eleanor could plan. Dr. Hayes stood up, collecting his documents. My task is complete. The deed is in order. The property awaits you when you're ready. If you'll allow me personal advice, don't decide anything now. Reflect, talk, give time to time. After the departure of Dr. Hayes and Margaret, the latter promising to return soon for a longer visit, Emily and Alexander remained in the living room, William now playing on the rug between them, oblivious to the emotional storm unfolding. So, began Alexander, hesitant, what do you think we should do? Emily looked at him, really looked beyond the impeccable appearance, beyond the name and fortune, beyond the shared past. She saw the man who had gradually emerged in recent weeks, a dedicated father, learning day by day the art of caring, an executive who was beginning to question the values that had guided his career, a human being seeking to reconnect with long-neglected parts of himself. I think we already know the answer, she replied softly. We just need the courage to admit it. That afternoon they walked together to the beach, William between them, holding both their hands, taking hesitant steps on the warm sand. They watched the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, tinting the sky and sea with orange tones. "Do you remember our last night at Lake Tahoe?" asked Alexander, breaking a long contemplative silence. "Before the board's call, before everything went wrong." Emily nodded. How could she forget? They had walked on the beach, just like now, but holding hands, the barriers between them momentarily, dissolved by the moonlight and the sound of waves. "That night I thought about saying something," he continued, "something that scared me, something I had never said to anyone before." "And what was it?" asked Emily, her heart involuntarily accelerating. Alexander stopped walking, bending down to pick up William. With his son secure in one arm, he extended his free hand to Emily, who accepted it after a moment of hesitation. "That I was falling in love with you," he replied simply. "Not with the Emily of the contract, not with the teacher my grandmother chose, but with the woman I met in those days, courageous, honest, able to see beyond appearances." The confession hung between them, carried by the gentle afternoon breeze. William, as if sensing the importance of the moment, remained quiet, resting his little head on his father's shoulder. "Why didn't you say it?" Emily finally asked. "Because I was a coward. Because I spent my life believing that feelings were weaknesses to be overcome, not strengths to be cultivated. And then came that call, the emergency at the company, the perfect opportunity to retreat to the safe territory of the man I was taught to be." Emily absorbed those words, recognizing their sincerity, the rare vulnerability they represented coming from a man like Alexander Grant. "And now?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Now I'm saying it," he replied, holding her hand more firmly. "I'm saying that I don't just want to visit William every morning. I don't want to just finance educational foundations or attend school events as the divorced father. I want a second chance, not at the contract marriage we had, but at something real, built day by day, choice by choice." William, as if understanding the weight of that moment, extended a little hand to touch his mother's face, creating a physical connection among the three. "It won't be easy," warned Emily, although her heart already knew the answer she would give. "You've spent your entire life being one person. You don't change overnight." "I'm not promising perfection," Alexander agreed. "I'm promising effort, commitment, the determination to be not just the man my father wanted me to be, but the man my grandmother knew I could be, the man William deserves as a father, the man that you might be able to love one day." The last words were said almost as a question, Alexander's vulnerability never so evident as in that moment, with his son in his arms and his heart exposed. Emily felt tears forming in her eyes, not tears of sadness or confusion, but of recognition of the path traveled, the lessons learned, the possibilities that now opened before her. "I already love that man," she replied simply. "That's why it hurt so much when he disappeared in Portland." The sun was touching the horizon now, creating a spectacle of colors in the sky. William, tired of the adult solemnity, began to stir in his father's arms, pointing to the seagulls flying over the beach. "I think we have a house to visit," said Alexander, smiling at his son and then at Emily. "A house by the sea, with space for a music studio, and a garden where children can grow free," she completed, returning the smile. The next day, accompanied by Dr. Hayes, they visited the property left by Mrs. Grant, a spacious house in Mediterranean style with wide verandas, facing the sea, airy rooms, and, as promised, a completely equipped music studio. In the backyard garden, an apple tree identical to the one at the school where they had reunited seemed to welcome them. "She thought of everything," commented Emily, marveling at the attention to detail. "My grandmother always believed that environment shapes the person," replied Alexander, observing the grand piano in the studio, the same model he had played in childhood. This house wasn't designed for the CEO of Grant Enterprises, but for the boy who loved music and dreamed of oceans. The move happened gradually over the following weeks. Emily kept her job at the Friday Harbor School, now also collaborating with Alexander in developing the project of the Eleanor Grant Foundation, which would expand the Haven model to other regions of the country. William, oblivious to the complexities of the adult world, quickly adapted to the new home. Enchanted with the space to explore, and the constant presence of both parents. On a Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the reunion in Friday Harbor, they held a small ceremony in the garden of the new house, not an official wedding since they were still legally married, but a renewal of vows. This time there were no contracts, clauses, or external expectations, just Emily and Alexander, William in Margaret's arms, and a small group of friends as witnesses, Mr. Joseph and Abigail, Meredith, Dr. Hayes, and some children from the educational project. "The first time we married out of obligation," said Alexander, holding Emily's hands before the small assembly. "Today, I choose to do this out of love. And I choose every day, not just now." "The first time, we were strangers playing roles," replied Emily, moved. "Today we are partners writing our own story, chapter by chapter." The rings they exchanged were simple, without ostentation, the antithesis of the elaborate rings they had worn during the contract marriage. And when William, in Margaret's arms, extended his little arms wanting to participate in the moment, they formed an embrace of three that sealed not only their union, but the true legacy of Mrs. Eleanor Grant, the rediscovery of love as a transformative force. In the years that followed, the house by the sea became not only the home of the Grant Reynolds family. Emily had insisted on keeping her surname, and Alexander had respected her decision, but also the operational center of the Eleanor Foundation, which quickly established itself as a reference in innovative educational projects across the country. Alexander remained involved with Grant Enterprises, but in a radically different way, delegating daily management to trusted executives while directing resources and influence toward socially responsible initiatives. Trips to Portland became increasingly rare, limited to board meetings and essential corporate events. In compensation, trips to Eleanor's haven multiplied. William, who was soon accompanied by a sister, Eleanor, in honor of her great-grandmother, grew up between Friday Harbor and Lake Tahoe, absorbing the best of both worlds, the simplicity of coastal life and the privilege of a broad and humanist education. On a special afternoon, when William completed 5 years, Alexander found him in the music studio, experimentally fingering the piano keys, with impressive concentration for his age. "Want to learn to play for real?" he asked, sitting beside his son on the bench. William's eyes, the same Grant eyes, intense and perceptive, lit up with expectation. "Will you teach me, Daddy?" "We'll learn together," replied Alexander, positioning his son's little fingers on the keys. "I'm relearning too." From the studio door, Emily observed the scene with her heart overflowing with gratitude, not just for the family they had built, for the love that had flourished from the most improbable circumstances, but for the journey that had brought them there. A journey that had begun with an unusual will and culminated in the discovery of the true meaning of legacy. Not companies or fortunes, but conscious choices, genuine connections, and the courage to reinvent oneself with each new dawn. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Emily and Alexander has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here on the left side of the screen. If you like this narrative about new beginnings, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore life's complexity